Today I stopped being real. No one's going to listen to a boy genius. No one's going to listen to a philosopher or a traveller. All the things I've been, who really ever gave a shit? People like listening to characters. Characters are safe because they're not real. So today, I become a character.
Warren is a large system for carrying around a pair of eyes that stare at the future until it blinks. And then he wins.
Warren Ellis will break your fucking head open.
I have dreams where he beats me to death with his cane.
Warren Ellis is a comic book writer.
Reading his work would make me a little bit afraid to meet him.
He's a frustrated inventor.
A kind of journalist.
Internet Jesus.
A Russian bear ripping a bunny rabbit to shreds.
Cackling and throwing like burning whiskey.
No, I can't really, I can't. I don't want to be rude.
Cane smash, whiskey braining, cigarette to face.
Warren Ellis will fuck you with the future and make you say thank you.
Oh, just give it a go, Jesus. Tell us about your childhood. I was groaning of that. I emerged at age 18 looking like this.
Even when he does talk about his past and childhood, it's little ghostly images. And that to me is sort of like this haunting.
I know, I grew up in a village. We had a big common, we had woodland, probably semi-rural, not quite suburban upbringing.
So Warren said, you know, I come from your hometown, from Southend-on-Sea, which is kind of working class, it's rough, it's raw, a holiday place to kind of get drunk, eat some fish and chips and have a grand old time.
My earliest coherent memory, it was 69, we'd just moved into our new house, I guess, and I remember my mum propping me on her knee in front of this crappy black and white Philco TV. I remember saying, watch this is history, this is. And it was the moon landing.
As children of the 70s and early 80s, we have a sort of shared nostalgia for a future that we kind of just missed. Space and manned space exploration is a real draw for us.
I didn't sleep well as a child. And I'm laughing now because I'm on my second can of Red Bull. And it seems to pass the time my dad made an entire Apollo 11 Airfix kit and painted it, and it all came apart to show the engine bells and the lunar lander. And I remember playing with that a lot as a kid. When I was a kid and I'd be taken to the cinema, my favourite part was always the previews before the main film. I don't know why, it was just little leaks of the future coming through.
Warren likes the future. He can't wait to see what comes next.
When I was very, very young, my dad brought a comic home for me. I probably wasn't more than 2 or 3 years old, and it was a science fiction comic.
Warren's father was definitely a big influence on his writing and helped him become a fan of science fiction.
My dad was quite mad. He was a writer as well, a struggling writer. He started writing when I was in my early teens, had one book published by a small local press, never got published again, got very close several times.
His father obviously inspired him greatly. I think that his father ultimately is like his driving force.
He was one of those guys who loved science fiction but didn't necessarily write it. He tended towards big novels about businessmen. His first novel was a comedy, but then he did lots of these, you know, shopping and shagging type things. There was one of them ended, the character was called Art Conquest. It was a terrible name, terrible name. What were you thinking, Dad? He's about to lose his business to this other big businessman. And at the end of it, there's this like, boardroom clash, and this other guy's going to take over the company. Art Conquest says, are you a betting man? The other guy says, yeah, I am. You want to bet your company on something? Art Conquest says, yeah. And unzips his trousers. I bet it's bigger than yours. And they actually slap their cocks out on the boardroom table. And Art Conquest, as has been mentioned several times throughout the novel, just has this monstrous horse-like appendage. And that's how he saves his company, and that's how the book ends. I remember I knew my father, so it didn't necessarily come as a surprise. It wasn't like I was 13 and he's like, read this, son. It's got big dicks in it. No, that wasn't happening. I knew from fairly early on I wanted to work with ideas.
I wanted to be a writer or something like a writer.
The local library had a children's section, a young adult section, and the adult section. And I'd read the entire children's section by the time I was 12, 13, and I got a special pass to go into the adult section.
He's 8 or 9, and we're both reading 2000 AD, and we're seeing a future cop who shoots people for traffic offences. We're seeing the biggest tyrannosaur ever chewing up cowboys and bits of them falling out of her mouth.
I was a righteous 2000 AD addict. I would get up at 7 in the morning to walk to the local newsagent to get 2000 AD fresh off the morning delivery. I always loved comics, I always thought visually. I probably drew my own little rough and ready comics and stapled them. I think visual thinking is a big part of being a comics writer.
My grandfather had died, and my mother was trying to explain it to me. Grandpa isn't coming back? No, she said, not ever again. And I remember saying, hold everything right fucking there. You went to all the trouble of conceiving me and giving birth to me and raising me and clothing me and all, and you make me cry and things hurt so much and disappointments crush my heart every day, and I can't do half the things I want to do, and sometimes I just want to scream. And what I've got to look forward to is my body breaking and something flipping off the switch in my head. I go through all this and then there's death. What is the motherfucking deal here? I wasn't having this. This was not fair. My mother was what you'd call a very lazy Christian, in that she never went to church, appeared to have no faith whatsoever, but believed in God and got very, very angry if you didn't. I decided from a fairly early age, in my early teens, that it was all a shell game.
I think the influence of growing up in the 1980s under Thatcher is that it leaves you with a great willingness to simply defy authority and to distrust all politicians.
You know, I grew up in Thatcher's Britain. We would look out of the window every morning to make sure the bitch hadn't put Daleks on the street yet. The political climate she created was such that she could out loud ruminate upon the efficacy of putting people with AIDS in concentration camps.
The government did nothing for you, and in many cases actively oppressed you.
As a teenager, I absolutely did all the things I was not supposed to do and barely survived coming out the other end. I had a lot of friends, went out a lot, got drunk a lot, I had a girlfriend. I was naked up a tree once in Colchester. I'm still not entirely sure how I got there. I'd obviously been conscious because I'd taken off my clothes and climbed up there. But I remember sort of coming to myself and realising where I was, and then looking down and there was a police car parked under me that hadn't seen me. So I kind of had to stay there for a while till he drove off. I was 15. You look back and you realise you were barely conscious most of the time. And for a subset of that time, you were barely sentient, just working off lizard brain commands.
When you hear the stories, it makes sense. That's why he can write things that well, is because he's actually lived some crazy, crazy shit.
There are a lot of crazy people. I've known too many people who have gone crazy, been institutionalised, come out the other side, often not as the same person. There was a guy who took a lot of acid, saw the wine light, and hacked off his own genitalia for Jesus. I knew this serious raver called Squeaky, and she was ice cold to the touch, and you didn't see her till the afternoon because she literally had problems walking in the morning. But that was the thing about people on E. They wanted to hug you. They wanted to jump around and flap their arms like spastics. And in the morning you woke up feeling like shit and you had no spinal fluid. The guy who was living in the bedsit next door did take acid and re-experienced his own birth. The police found him in a fetal ball and howling. He wasn't the same after that, but frankly, it wasn't normal to begin with. It was the 80s, we weren't all happy.
If Warren hadn't become a comic book writer, he could have easily become a journalist.
The National Union of Journalists would hold great big exams for applicants, and I got one of the places, but contingent on passing both of my A-levels, which I didn't. But after that, I had to go and get a job. And then I was unemployed for a long time.
He's someone who's meant to write, obviously, so I think anytime he's doing anything else, it's wrong.
I do not pine for not being able to afford food. I do not pine for being terrified every time a bill came through the door. I do not pine for sleeping rough under the pier. Yes, there is a sense of purism, but people associate with that because they were younger and their minds moved faster and they had more ideas than they had written down yet.
Before he was a comic book writer, Warren Ellis worked a series of shit jobs.
Any job impacts your writing, shitty or not. Because you're out in the world with people. And you can't help but pick up phrases, anecdotes, inflections. The worst thing about living with a writer is that everything is material. Work in the bar, work in the record shop. I was a literary proofreader for about a day. Worked for the official receiver in bankruptcy for 6 months. Closest thing I ever had to an office job. I just couldn't do it. It was soul destroying. Worked in a bookshop, ran a bookshop. It was the one place in town where you could, for instance, buy books on street drugs, or Hunter S. Thompson books, or magic books. And the bookshop got shut down. And I said, well, here's my chance. So I'll just live off the unemployment and write and see if I can actually do this.
Even back then, it was good fun, actually. He was funny.
Just this skinny little rakish kid in a raincoat who would stand in the corner talking to everyone.
And you could tell he was intending to go places, like he had plans.
If you're not in it to be the best writer you possibly can be and tell the stories you are absolutely burning to tell, forget it. You're not going to get anywhere.
He just needed to get his feet stuck in a few doors to get him there, which he did in short order.
In a world with really boring comics, one man stood against the tide, took a stand, and wrote something worth reading. Warren Ellis, coming to a comic book store near you.
How did I fall into comics? It's a long time ago now, and I was chemically different during those times. It was the 80s. Oh God, I think I wrote a letter to a magazine about comics, and another magazine about comics got in touch with me and asked me to write journalism for them, and that was Speakeasy.
He wrote the most amazing reviews, you know, it was really heartfelt, searing, poetic reviews as a writer you wish someone would give you.
It was while he was writing for Speakeasy that they launched their own comic.
The Speakeasy editor phoned me up and said, if you think you're so clever, why don't you write us a comic? I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, you just blasted the crap out of this comic called Cyberpunk. Why don't you do us a cyberpunk comic? I said, well, the whole point of the review was Cyberpunk's already all over. He said, I don't care. So I sat down and came up with the Lazarus Churchyard, and after a little faffing around, they bought it.
In Lazarus Churchyard, I think you saw the anger he brings to his work, the heart. You're seeing the first vestiges of what Warren would grow into.
Selling my first story, yeah, that was good. I made this shit up out of my own head and they gave me money for it. I like this.
The wonderful thing about Lazarus Churchyard, I think, was the unremitting cynicism. This was a man who was cursed with immortality, who wanted to die. And as a nihilistic teenager, full of all weird emotions and hormones, that I could utterly and utterly relate to.
I knew people who really had had enough at 20, 21 and really just wanted to lay down and have it over with.
He makes it clear that human beings have the potential for greatness, but we're really far too likely to get caught up in the day-to-day trauma of existence and can forget what it means to look ahead.
Once you see yourself in print, you will see in appalling clarity all the things you did wrong, and you'll hate yourself and want to die. And then you'll get up in the morning and you will learn all the lessons and apply them to the next piece of work. And then you'll make almost as many mistakes. And it's an ongoing process. None of us are perfect.
And once you get something in print, all kinds of publishers start to pick up on you.
I just moved in with my girlfriend and we had very little money, but I had work at Tundra UK, so everything was going to be fine. And then, like the day after we moved in together, Tundra UK collapsed and told me they weren't going to honour any of my invoices. They had no money and they were just going to fly to the four winds. We were screwed. And it was just getting to the point where I thought I was going to have to go out and get a job. When, just as I was giving up, God bless him, Archie Goodwin phoned the house and said, I've just read that pitch you sent me 18 months ago. Can I buy it? And that was it. That saved me. Because not only did that mean instant money, but Archie Goodwin was such a figure that when he bought something from you, you had essentially made your bones. And I started getting work from Marvel immediately afterwards.
The first thing that really jumped out to me is Hellstorm. The book didn't make his name, but you could tell there's something different about this guy. And certainly there was nothing else at Marvel Comics at that time that was like that.
The book didn't last too long, but it didn't matter because here was this guy who'd arrived in American comics and there was simply no one else like him. A good deal of it was pretty nasty stuff. And when you consider how safe and anemic most American comics were, Warren was bound to make a splash.
There was an issue of Hellstorm that I think had a good idea in it. Other than that, no, there's some awful stuff in there. Terrible comics. Oh, well, I never think I'm doing good work. You just have to be the best available you that day.
He'd just started writing for Marvel, and he was doing a little signing, and there were a few people there. I was trying to tell him that next year he'd have a queue outside the convention centre. He was going, no, that'll never happen, I bet you. And we did a bet. He was right, I was wrong. It took 2 years. 2 years' time, the queue for Warren Ellis was out of the building and around the corner.
Without the high-profile Marvel stuff, it would have been very, very difficult for me to continue doing the original creator-owned work that I came into the business to do. Doing that 2 years at Marvel made all the difference.
The end of the 80s and start of the 90s, all I remember of Warren is this fleeting, spectral, skinny ghost that was never quite in the room with anyone, but always flitting by outside, chain smoking.
He had not quite developed his booming presence that he has now, and very charismatic presence. He was a lot more quiet.
He was dry, he was witty, he was verbose, he smoked, he drank.
A girlfriend bought me a book for alcoholic American writers. And I loved that book. It was absolutely fascinating. And I said, thank you for this. This is such a good book. She looked at me and she said, I didn't buy it for you to enjoy. There was a reason why I bought you that book. Totally passed me by.
Warren is definitely someone who comes out with an idea very much fully hatched, and I think that's really part of what his strength is.
I don't know that I have anything that could be described as a process or method. It's honestly whatever works.
The start of the project is always the most exciting. The blank page, where everything hangs as potential and you're deciding which bits you're going to pluck out of the ether.
We were talking about writing, and he said, the first thing I learned, the most important thing, is just connect. Just always connect with the audience. And it was really the last thing I expected Warren Ellis to say.
It can start with an image, it can start with an idea, it can start with a line of dialogue. Because ideas can come from anywhere. They're big round buggers and you have to look for the right way in. It's never the same door every time.
Any writer is always writing for themselves. So, I mean, the point is that, you know, I want to write something that I'm happy with. And that's really the goal.
One of the first comics I ever got into was Transmetropolitan, one of his larger works.
Warren changed the game. I've had so many people come up to me and say, this got me back into comics. You know what, Transmetropolitan is the first comic book I ever read.
I knew that was going to be a big stage where I was going to be able to do a lot of the stuff I wanted to do. And I had so much I wanted to say.
It was Warren off the leash. It was him saying exactly what he wanted to say.
It's about a gonzo journalist in the near future. It's very much an adult comic with a lot of rough content, but also a lot of very serious science fictional extrapolation of current social trends.
I was reading Hunter Thompson, Charles Bukowski, Kurt Vonnegut. When I found Transmetropolitan and Spider Jerusalem, I saw a reflection of those writers in that character.
Spider Jerusalem, you might remember, is the worst part of everybody, including me. I wouldn't give that bastard house room. Spider Jerusalem is me when I've first woken up in the morning. Ah, fuck everybody. Stop lying to me, cat.
That inspirational journalistic character who's got something to say and who wasn't scared to say it. So it's Woodward, Bernstein, Hunter Thompson all wrapped up into this kind of one weirdly tattooed, horrible, horrible ball.
It was always entertaining to write because Mr. Hyde is always more interesting than Dr. Jekyll. In Spider, there was always a big part of letting your id out to play.
I got to go stay at his house. Things that he had asked me to draw into the book were there, and his office was small and cramped, and it was stacked high with full ashtrays, and I'm like, he is Spider Jerusalem.
I hope not in all ways, because he'd probably be dead by now.
Spider and Warren have this public persona that is just like, don't fuck with me. I will rip your head off and feed it to you.
Spider Jerusalem wasn't based on me. Whether or not you can say that any of my characters are, I don't know. That's always a hard question to ask a writer, because parts of you inevitably leak into the work one way or the other.
That book had a profound influence on me in that comics didn't have to just be superheroes, and they could have other messages in them and comments on society.
When you read Transmet, it's like filth, and Spider Jerusalem is like knocking people's teeth out and everything, but beneath it there's this core of humanity and compassion.
There's an issue of Transmetropolitan I wrote inside 24 hours in one sitting, and I looked it over again when it was drawn. There was no revision or anything, just banged it out, so I remember very little about it. But it's issue 8, Another Cold Morning.
Issue 8 is still my favorite. It was the revival where the woman's brought back from life out of cryogenic stasis.
Looking at her new charity-donated clothes, still bearing the ammonia spore of the man who wore them last, Mary's shocked brain started to a new understanding. She wasn't wanted here. She had been foisted upon a future already busy enough with its own problems by a past that couldn't have cared less. She could have told the future what it had been like to meet Che Guevara in that old Cuban schoolhouse. She could have told them about the last Queen and Albert Einstein and a million other true stories besides. But the future didn't want to know. Her story's over, because you wouldn't have it any other way.
And the only way anybody in that world would know that story is because of our hero, Spider Jerusalem.
Touching old-fashioned faith that journalism can actually save the world.
Tells us more about Warren than I think he intended to ever tell anyone about himself.
The job of the writer is, I think, as the job of the journalist, to simply stand up and say, here's where I think I am today and here's what I think it looks like. But the writer, I think, has an extra responsibility to say, look up, because you're here too. Don't just take my word for it. You need to look up now and see you're living here too.
You see all this fucked up shit so that you can truly feel other people and help them, and that's kind of how Warren is.
Every year I will get a couple of dozen emails from people saying, I entered journalism school because of Transmetropolitan. I like the idea of releasing generations of angry journalists into the world.
Spider Jerusalem via Warren, I mean, I think he aches for justice. There's a need for that in him. And I think that's what the character's drug abuse was for, is just to numb him to the absolute rage he must feel about all the apathy around him.
Transmetropolitan, I think, represents the future we're most likely to see, in that it's really just the times we're living in now, amped up some more.
We don't know what we're coming to, you know, I mean, we're all living in this transmetropolitan world.
And Transmet predicted Twitter. The swing state for the Smiler was Florida.
He's got that spooky sci-fi knack for prophecy that Orwell had.
And I think that was fueled by his rapacious approach to researching the technological and the societal.
I don't know that I have a philosophy about the future, so much as an enduring interest in it.
The reality that Warren has created in Transmetropolitan is simultaneously science fiction-y and also hyper-real.
You can't pick one thing and say that's the future. The future's a lot more like weather forecasting. And as everyone knows, the weather forecast isn't always right because there's an awful lot of variables.
For a certain generation of people who do futures work, Transmetropolitan is a touchstone document. One of the clearest articulations of how bizarre the world of the future could be, and yet there's very little about that story that is not at least plausible.
The thing about time travel is very slow. It only happens one day at a time, so you need to pay attention.
It wasn't really until Transmetropolitan kicked off that he was more comfortable not reining himself in. And of course, he was starting to build this online personality brand that would stand him in good stead, and continues to.
Warren was straight in there on the internet back in the 90s. I think the thing had just been invented by two chimps in a cave somewhere, and this was even before there was such a thing as a social network.
See, at the time, the way you developed a following and built an audience for your work was to go out on the convention trail in the States. People would go out and hit 6 or 7 conventions a year. And not only living in Britain could I not afford that, but it just sounded like a hell of a lot of time away from doing the actual writing. And I'm sitting there in front of my computer one day thinking, well, this is just no good. I can't go out and do this. Oh, look, I have a computer that's connected to the internet.
Of course, he also found several thousand people prepared to worship at his feet. He likes that.
I did a virtual appearance at a convention in Germany where they put 3 net-connected computers on the convention floor. We opened up a chat room and people could ask me questions from the convention floor and I could answer in real time. And after that, I thought, I'm onto something here. If you build it, they will come only actually works in Hollywood films. Everywhere else, if you build it and don't tell anyone about it, no one will go there and it will be abandoned and will rot right there, and eventually you will find hobos fucking in it.
Warren understands the internet in a way that a lot of other creators, and certainly in the way that publishers, just absolutely do not.
He's very egalitarian and he's very willing to engage his fans. Many people who are at his level of celebrity would only speak to other people who they deem on their level, whereas Warren could give a fuck about that.
I mean, just from a cold business standpoint, there's a real value in making a connection with your buyers and making a connection with your audience.
But he is the king of persona and self-promotion.
As a commercial writer, I am a commodity. I am a brand, it's unavoidable. So you can either run away screaming from that and hide from it, or you can turn into the skid.
This online persona is really part of the fun of Warren. He sort of created this mystique.
He's a bohemian. He's always kind of boasting about how much he's drunk, or that he's falling over, or that he's like smoking cigarettes or staggering around on his cane.
He's like out there with his broom on the front porch of the internet, like, damn kids, like, crumble, crumble, crumble.
The drunken, abusive uncle of the internet.
I mean, he's internet Jesus, for frick's sake.
I am a messiah, damn it. Ask anyone on the internet.
Kind of an asshole, but the kind of asshole that's really appealing.
Would you rather be feared or respected? I would rather be feared. Respect wears off, fear doesn't. Terror is eternal. I don't believe I just said that. I've clearly had too much to drink already.
People love it. I mean, he has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers.
I don't know if it's like people like being punched in the guts a lot.
Because you've got to remember, the definition of a writer is someone who sits in a small room and makes shit up all day. We, by habit, wear different personalities, different characters and different philosophies, because that's half the fun of writing.
The old bastard shtick.
I think that's like his first filter. Like, if you don't get the gag, you're not going to get along well.
I don't even know if it's so much as a character as much as his decision to use the internet as his face, as his only face.
In the earlier days of the internet, we were all kind of waiting for that moment when we'd have our personas and our avatars and everything. And, you know, Warren was way ahead of the game on that.
I can never decide if that particular persona is just a bit more me or a bit less me, but it's certainly some part of me that doesn't necessarily come out in daily conversation.
When I finally got to know him a little bit, it was really funny. It was like two different people.
He likes to present himself as crazier than he really is. I think he's crazy like a fox.
I was talking to Warren about doing this documentary shoot, and I was threatening him. I was saying, I'm going to tell them the truth, that you're actually nice in person. And he was very, very angry at this.
People don't really want to know Warren's really, really nice. People say, Warren, I once saw him broke a guy in half. He just punched his hands in there, tore him asunder. It was amazing. No, he's an incredibly generous, open-hearted, whiskey-swigging man.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
He's a very lovely man.
I'm sorry, what did you say again?
Kind and sweet and gentle.
A real gentleman.
Kind as can be.
He's the kindest, gentlest, sweetest person in the world.
Horrible fucking people.
The fact is, he's a marshmallow.
He's always been a big sweetie to me.
Warren is a pussycat.
I will slap all of them one day.
One of the biggest hearts of any human being I've ever known.
I'll kill them all. What?
Real Warren is a teddy bear.
He's a teddy bear. The guy's a teddy bear.
I want their names so I can go to their houses and piss on their beds, honestly. Teddy bear.
He's actually kind of shy. He actually does care about what people think of him personally, which I thought was funny because you'd never know. You know, he is kind of Mr. Sensitive.
Warren wanted to create this kind of abrasive persona because it allows him to have an ongoing relationship with his readers and yet maintain a distance from them.
As a result, he created the Warren Ellis Forum online, which was his idea of, I don't have to go to conventions around the world, everyone can come to me.
Back at the time, he was already developing a reputation, but he wasn't quite as big as he is now.
And he set up shop and he shouted out, come talk to me. And a few people did. And then they started to really enjoy meeting with Warren and meeting with each other.
From a certain perspective, you can possibly say that I succeeded in remaking comics in my own image by creating a space for people who thought like I did, who then went off and did it. From a certain perspective. But it's still hideously fucking egotistical, isn't it?
And that's kind of what the WEF really was. It was like a mode of activism, and it was trying to, reimagine what comics could be.
You could talk to pros when you weren't pros and learn so much. It was very friendly, it was very good-natured.
And then after about a year, it really just exploded, and suddenly hundreds of new people were signing up every day.
I respect Warren as a guy who's a scene maker and a kind of setter of the social tone.
In his various communities, he doesn't just have comics creators, writers and artists, he also has musicians,
filmmakers,
porn stars,
firebrand journalists,
natural healers,
photographers,
performance artists,
biochemists.
People that never would have met, never would have known each other or collaborated together.
There are a lot of people who are now great friends, and some of them partners.
I met my husband on Warren's forum.
And that was where I first met my fiancée.
I think on the Warren Ellis Forum we had 3 or 4 marriages.
I met my wife on Warren's internet. The woman that I have put babies in, I met because of Warren Ellis.
I knew Kelly Sue pretty well and I got to know Fraction.
She was, like me, a personality on the forum.
Yeah, one day you noticed them flirting. And I remember she emailed me 3 months later saying, oh, I've got a monster crush on Fraction.
He asked if he could call me, and we were on the phone for 9 hours until the phone battery actually died.
And then a couple of months later they were visiting.
And we knew each other socially, and then knew each other biblically.
You know, within a year or 2 they were married.
And now we got 2 babies.
It was all Warren's fault.
One tries not to become suffused with a sense of power. What they don't realise, of course, is that I own their children. Yeah, it's in the small print. I figured, you know, when the comics writing runs out, I can just become a human trafficker. There seems to be money in that.
Warren seems to have this fundamental belief that he should help people, and he should signal boost people, and he should nurture people.
A lot of people in the comics industry give a lot of talk to finding young talent or promoting women, but Warren does that.
He's a trendsetter, he's a taste setter.
He loves artistic people, he loves creative people. And if he liked your stuff, he'd just feature you. And then suddenly people would act like you were good, whereas 24 hours before, you know, they couldn't give a shit.
He was trying to make it accessible for everyone to feel like they could create something.
You know something interesting will come of it. New things will be made, and I like new things.
He's actually helped make a lot of people's careers.
I owe Warren pretty much my entire career.
I pretty much owe Warren my career.
Nobody else had the clout to push me through as the artist on some of these books, but Warren was insistent.
And my last name is actually Fritchman, but my login on the Ellis forum was Matt Fraction. And then when I started to put a book out, I was like, the only people who know who I am are the people in this fucking forums.
I wouldn't call him my dad. I mean, I get along well with my dad, but yeah, he's definitely my comic book daddy.
So once you get to a certain profile where people actually pay attention to what you're saying, you use that to direct people to the good stuff and maybe help people along who might struggle without the attention that you, in your very privileged position, can actually direct to them. I just assumed that was the way this was done.
There's like a class of us that came up through the WEF.
At the time, you know, I had a day job, I was sitting at my office desk bored, and it was a really good way to feel like you were involved in something quite special and creative?
It was a huge thing. So huge that I actually had to either make it part of my job or shut it down. So I closed it.
Because everything that has come since is modeled on Warren or in answer to Warren, inspired by Warren, affected by Warren in some way.
Eventually, the web spread out and it wouldn't have been as big a thing, but it was a central point for comics.
I remember it as being a collection of some of the smartest and funniest people around, and now half of us have taken over comics.
If you want to read 300 superhero comics a month, then you are sick and you need medical help. Rip from their steaming corpses the things that led superhero comics to dominate the medium. The mad energy, the astonishing visuals, the fetishism, whatever, and apply them to the telling of other stories in other genres. I've been quoted at length over the years about how I hate all superheroes. And it's true, I didn't particularly grow up with the form and have no particular fondness for them. What I always objected to was their absolute dominance in the marketplace.
It's not controversial to say that, you need more than superhero comics. And yet it is controversial because it seems like nobody ever wants to buy anything but superhero comics.
It's just annoying to me. Yeah. It's like walking into a bookshop and finding nothing but novels about nurses as far as the eye can see.
There are as many different kinds of comics as there are stories to tell.
That said, I have done some superhero work. What you do is you take a soap opera and you take out all the sex scenes and replace them with people punching each other. That's it. It's the same structure.
So he says he doesn't like superheroes that much, but he does write an awful lot of them. I think that does protest too much.
His superheroes are gritty and real and not very happy people. They live in a world in which there's not necessarily a definite right and wrong.
He sees the absurdity of superheroes, but he also sees their use to create a modern mythology. And what is mythology but these resonant stories that scare you, that inspire you, because they're these larger-than-life characters.
When I go into a superhero job, it's one I've chosen because I'm interested in finding a way to make it interesting to me.
Stormwatch was Warren recreating the super team for the 21st century.
Quite political, very thoughtful, very intelligent. It didn't sell.
I discovered that Wildstorm were publishing Stormwatch just because they liked reading it. They weren't making a penny off it. It was selling dismally. And I just thought, this is wrong. I really feel like I'm taking advantage of you now.
So he evolved it into the Authority, which was still intelligent, other than that, almost the complete opposite.
If you caught me on a different day, I said is, what I did with the Authority is take Stormwatch and strip out all the plot and character.
It consisted of lots of very powerful people hitting things very hard, lots of violence, lots of action.
Flipped it open. Moscow destroyed on the first page. It's like, okay, this is my kind of thing.
Stuff exploded and dudes got kicked.
Smoking, drinking, sex, drugs.
There needed to be a bit more flash and thunder and more spectacle. Spectacle was certainly one of the key words.
And it was a huge hit. This is what they want became the popular mantra.
For me, the heart of the thing is and always will be Jenny Sparks. She smokes, drinks, and fucks her way through the entire century. Her epitaph, "Bugger this, I want a better world," is to me the greatest thing a superhero can say.
Oh, the Authority were absolutely the bad guys. It's just that they were incredibly, well, I was going to say interesting, but at least charismatic. I'll give myself that much. They were charismatic bad guys who just happened to be fighting even worse guys.
The people who are saving the world might not necessarily be great people. They might be assholes.
I mean, Hitler looks like the good guy if he's beating up Satan, but that still doesn't mean you want to leave Hitler alone with the kids.
You can see him examining the idea of what it would be like to be superhuman and what it would be like for us to have superhumans in the world, and the answer is usually awful, terrifying, a nightmare.
The Authority was out not just to preserve our way of life, but actively to change it. The lengths to which she would go were pretty extraordinary. The damage she might do might be extraordinary, but it was all in the service of a vision.
I created situations where they were by default the good guys, but they were good guys who caused vast amounts of property damage, killed an entire country's worth of people, and of course stabbed God through the heart.
I don't think it's too much of an overstatement to say that The Authority changed superhero comics forever. It was such a huge hit. It was so new and so fresh.
And then it influenced every other writer for the next 10 years. Everyone thought, oh, I can apply that to Iron Man or to Thor or to the Justice League.
What was actually startling, shocking and new is now just how people do it.
I guess I started when I was about 17. I do worry about lung cancer and things like that, but frankly I find it very hard to function without these. I put it down to my dad's caffeine and nicotine riddled seed. I quit when I was 30. I mean, after I quit, I didn't write a word for 3 months. I had no focus at all, and then I was sick for years. Ended up collapsing, unconscious for 6 weeks. I put on, frankly, most of this weight. Blood pressure problems. Developed a terminal allergy to common house dust. Quitting was actually probably the worst thing I ever did in terms of my health.
This is the part where I call him on his bullshit. And the idea that somehow not putting tar in his lungs would be worse for his dust allergy is a crock of shit. He's addicted to it.
This is ludicrous. There was a pack laying around at my dad's funeral, who of course died of lung cancer. 2 weeks before he died, I told him I was really craving cigarettes again. And he said to me, "Go on, a little of what you fancy does you good." I said, "You're laying there dying of fucking lung cancer telling me to have a cigarette." He laughed so hard I thought he was going to die right there on the phone.
You know, if you wanted to draw a graphic novel about a graphic novelist, you'd probably draw Warren. You can just see him sitting in an untidy room, surrounded by paper and outlines and scribblings.
Warren himself is big and bold and beautiful.
He's a giant. Like, he's a big dude.
He's gigantic. He's like 19 feet tall.
When you stand up and shake his hand and you see like his hand go around your tiny little doll hands, and you're like, wow, you are a giant. No wonder you fucking break keyboards. Look at your fingers. Like, you just...
And he really is a Warren Ellis comic come to life. I mean, he's, you know, he's bold and he's got the voice and he's the cane and he's just so, I mean, he's such a badass.
I swear if he wore like a black robe or something, he'd look like a kick-ass Rasputin. And literally a dude that would take a few bullets and not stop.
One of the last shows we did together, he had the cane because his knee was all jacked up and shit. Fuck, you can imagine he was getting beaten to death by him. It was, no, great. Now Warren gets to have a weapon all the time. That's wise.
This kid got up and goes, "Warren Ellis, why are you such a cunt?" So Warren just got off stage, walked up and picked the kid up and threw him off the wall.
I'd like to chop up a body with Warren Ellis. He looks like he knows his way around joints.
He's the only man in the world that I will ever let say to me, "Caitlin, shut the fuck up."
Did you ever want to set someone's head on fire just to see what it looked like? Did you ever stand in the street and think to yourself, I could make that nun go blind just by giving her a kiss? Did you ever lay out plans for stitching babies and stray cats into a perfect new human? Did you ever stand naked, surrounded by people who want your gleaming sperm, squirting frankincense, soma and testosterone from every pore? If so, then you're the bastard who stole my drugs on Friday night, and I will find you, oh yes. Oh God, yeah. When did discovering disgusting stuff on the internet become part of my everyday existence?
Warren enjoys putting disturbing images out there to make us all cringe.
My mailbox used to just be this endless pit of horror, where people just say, I've just seen something beyond human imagination. You should see it too. Click this link. And it'll just be some colossal perversion that would have made Desaad wretch.
I can honestly, to this day, remember, 10 years later, I saw that on the Ellis forum.
Make it go away, Mommy.
The arse eels is still the one that horrifies me, where one clearly brain-damaged Japanese woman upends another clearly brain-damaged Japanese woman, inserts a funnel into her rectum, and then pours in little baby eels. And that's not the worst thing I've ever seen, that's just the one that still lives behind my eyes.
The ostrich fetishists.
There's actually a community of gay sailing enthusiasts, and all the photos of these big burly gay guys in walk-in wet rooms with balls the size of basketballs, with their arms around each other doing this for the camera, and oh yeah. But did you ever see One Man, One Jar?
This is exactly how that world works, but at the same time, it is so much crazier than anything that you actually run into in real life, and usually it's the opposite.
I know one day it's going to be someone coming up to me with a bag and, "Here, I made this for you. It used to be a baby."
He's someone who's managed, despite, you know, almost being like the source of horrible information on the internet for so many of us, to actually maintain this sort of sense of childlike wonder, and which is actually pretty sweet and inspiring.
You want to talk about Planetary? I may have to hurt you.
Planetary is the autopsy table on which 20th century pop culture is dissected. We take Godzilla, we take superheroes, we take Dracula, we take Doc Savage, we take Tarzan, we put them on the table, we pull them apart, and the Planetary organization explains to us why they were important to us as a culture.
Some kind of Rosetta Stone for the history of pulp literature. It was the first time reading a comic book I felt like comics could be something else, something bigger.
He sort of had this idea that we would attack different genres every issue, and that every issue would be a pop single.
I like lots of different genres. I would love to be that guy who says, I only listen to psychedelic music that was made in Hanover in 1972. Actually, I wouldn't. That sounds like a really boring way to live. I'm interested in lots of different things. I like lots of different genres. So I would like to try lots of different genres. He really just took pop culture and put it in us through a sieve.
How are we connected by the stories that we tell, and how alive are those stories outside of us? Even though we've created them, they do influence behavior. So where is the continent of their existence?
I took all the genre tropes that people loved and scraped the barnacles of age off them to try and reveal what it was about those concepts that energized people in the first place.
Not since The Watchmen have I run to the comic book store, just wishing and hoping every week. And then of course he took a year for that last issue to come out. That's right, Warren, I'm on to you.
The arc of Planetary had to be first about the big ideas and the standalone stories, and it had to become about the people. And so the last episode had to be not about everything we'd seen, but just about the people reaching their own resolution.
There was just such a great period there in the early 2000s when you had, you know, The Authority and Planetary.
Because then he had Transmetropolitan, on top of that.
He really kind of set the tempo for independent creators.
That was one of the last points in comics, I think, where things were super exciting.
I just remember it being exhausting. I just remember, if I don't write 6 pages today, I'm dead. And thinking that every day. But at that point in your career as a writer, your head is still full of all the stories you haven't told yet. You can be very prolific at that age because you've been thinking about writing since you can remember. And publication is the dam. And it all builds up behind that. There was still this huge volume of stuff I hadn't done yet, and ideas I hadn't expressed yet, and the things I'd wanted to say that I hadn't been able to say yet.
He's got Dr. Whiskey, and he's got his willpower that he sits down and he creates these things.
What advice I would give to aspiring writers? I mean, the advice I would give to myself is far different. I would start off with a list of women you shouldn't talk to, and probably also a list of nights you really shouldn't get drunk, and kinds of alcohol you shouldn't touch or else you turn into a Tasmanian devil. Bacardi. Never drink Bacardi, Warren. Or at least not by the pint.
The reactions I get are usually, oh, you've worked with Warren, or, oh, you've worked with Warren.
I always prefer to know who the artist is in advance so I can study their work, divine what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that, you know, they can produce the best possible and certainly most comfortable job they can.
If he knows who you are as an artist or whatever, he picks the right people for the right projects.
In the beginning, it was very hands-on between the two of us, and as we got more comfortable with one another, he gave me more freedom.
I liken it to like two jazz musicians, you know, and we may even be playing completely different things, but they work together.
A lot of the time I want to stay out of the artist's way, so I'll just write the most descriptive script I've got, or the one I think is best tailored to their skills.
Even though he was fairly explicit in terms of what the character's emotions were, he wasn't in terms of what was actually happening in the panels. He kind of left that a little bit more to me.
I would get the scripts in, I would read them, and I could see everything. I could see it all. It was just right there in front of me.
I do sketch out characters, I sketch out pages, and then I never let anyone see any of them because they're terrible.
A classic example is he will write a panel description, and in it, he'll say, do it like this, or I know you're going to do whatever you want to anyway, but just make it cool.
And you've got the phone number, you've got the email. If anything doesn't make sense or you want to talk about it, just get in touch and we'll fix it.
He's very hands-off, and I like that. He does his thing and then lets me do my thing.
Splash page, and it just said, Spider walks down the street in the porn district. And I'm like, on it.
You always want to see what the artist has made of the work, so yeah, that's always interesting. You always look forward to that.
It was my world too, and I felt free to make it as cool as I could imagine.
I think we only talked about work a little bit. We would talk about bathroom habits and stuff.
Some artists I will actually go to and say, give me a list of things you fancy drawing. Back around 1990 when I came up with Hotwire, I said to Steve Pugh, Steve, give me a list of things you like drawing. And I got this list back and it was girls, leather, girls, motorbikes, girls, monsters, girls, rapper. Did I mention girls? And if you read Hotwire, you'll find that I tailored that to him almost exactly. And it's also a cautionary tale of, you know, don't ask artists what they like drawing unless you're really ready to hear the answer. UFO organisations have been contracting of late because no one's seeing flying saucers anymore. They turn up at weird cultural stress points where the culture is worried about something amorphous rather than concrete, like terrorism. The 90s UFO glut coincided with the threat of nuclear war fading, relative political stability in the US and UK, and yet the feeling that the turn of the century meant something that we couldn't put into words. I almost miss flying saucers, because they might mean that we don't have anything serious to worry about. 9/11 itself didn't particularly inform my writing, because I've never been a stranger to living with terrorism. I live in Britain. We've been getting bombed by terrorists for quite a long time now. There was a comment somewhere that lives with me to this day. Someone's first reaction was they wished Superman was real so he could have stopped it. Which, to me, as an opinion, is almost anti-evolutionary. The thought process behind that is so infantile that to this day I still can't completely get my head around it. And Global Frequency very much came as a reaction to that kind of reaction.
In terms of the invention in Warren's book that I would like to see the most in the world, and probably the world needs the most, it's probably the Global Frequency organization.
Global Frequency is a group of regular human people who get picked out to help save the world from an impending disaster.
And this was definitely him putting forward the idea that we can save ourselves.
What can I do without superpowers, without a costume, without anything except my individual force and the ability to connect?
Global Frequency is rescue fiction, and Global Frequency is rescue fiction about us rescuing ourselves, not waiting for Space Daddy to do it for us, because that way lies death.
And it's the leaders that you always gravitate towards, the people who are really behind everything.
Red is another kind of genre fiction. It's a kind of what-if story.
A retired secret agent who's the best in the world at what he did and just did horrible, horrible things, so much so that they've kept him a secret.
One thing that was really interesting about the Red comic is that there's absolutely no science fiction or fantasy. It's something that plausibly could happen in the real world. That's actually kind of unusual for Warren's work.
They assume, like most people, that fear will do the trick. Fear will keep everyone in place. Fear will keep everyone distracted from what's really going on. Let him know we can beat him up. Let him know that we could have killed him. Let him know that we can destroy him. Let the fear shrivel him up. Fuck that. I'm not afraid of them. They're afraid of me. They're afraid of the truth.
There was a time when Warren Ellis kind of fell out with DC. He'd written an issue of the comic book Hellblazer called Shoot, which dealt with young people in schools and gun crime.
Warren wrote easily the most potent story I've ever worked on in that issue. Several weeks before the book was supposed to go to print, the Columbine school shootings happened, and DC Comics felt it would be ill-timed at best to release that story.
It became clear that it was going to be edited down to the level of an episode of Scooby-Doo. So I actually said, don't publish it. I will not have it released with my name on it. And also I quit.
Seeing somebody stand up and say, no, I'm not going to stand for that. You know, you will respect me as a creator, and if you don't, then I'm just going to walk, was kind of mind-blowing, especially in American comics.
And that's when he started talking to William Christensen of Avatar Press.
Avatar is an independent press, creator-owned.
Ultimately, you just don't want someone telling you what you can and can't do. It's a pain, and if you can avoid it by going to a smaller publisher, you will.
They will basically let me do whatever I want, and I have a degree of control over the entire package.
What he's doing at Avatar are these little comics of big ideas, one after another.
He did a book called Scars for Avatar.
It's a cop story about a cop who is haunted by the death of his own child, investigating a child murderer, and it's gruesome.
I wrote the introduction to Scars. And when I wrote Warren and asked if I could do it, his response was, why?
It's hard to do things in comics that are really frightening. That book is frightening.
And then there's reality. The kid found chopped up in the woods. The guy knifed to death outside my house by my neighbour, who just suddenly lost his shit one day and decided he was going to run out and kill the next person he saw walk by. And that was exactly the same time that I would leave the house to buy cigarettes. My girlfriend and I were away that day. If we hadn't been, I would have walked past my neighbour's house instead of that poor bastard. And I would have been gut-punched to death by a kitchen blade. That's real. That still chills me at night and stops me cold during the day.
In all of Warren's work, he presents the nasty side of man and tries to reflect on why. There is redemption there, but it's never an easy redemption with Warren.
And you're just like, wow, this was really well written and this is an amazing story, but I feel kind of dirty for reading it.
Some of it is still me having been engaged for a lot of years with the unfinished business of the 20th century. Dr. Sleepless is very much about the one charismatic figure and how we will tend to look for a messiah and follow them no matter who they are or what they're doing.
But Dr. Sleepless is an inventor who the future has disappointed.
Everyone wants a jetpack. Nobody's ever going to get a jetpack.
And he's removed himself from this kind of decadent society, which he then leaks his inventions into to subvert it. You're unsure whether he is a messiah or a madman.
Dr. Sleepless was a way to test run some ideas, and obviously it was amusing to me to put them in the mouth of the bad guy to see how they sound.
The kinds of technologies that Warren talks about in Dr. Sleepless are very real. They may not be in the wild today, but they're the kinds of things that are being developed today. And the kinds of intentional abuses that the Dr. Sleepless character engages in, using these kinds of technologies, are very much the kinds of abuses that one would expect to see as these technologies become more prevalent.
This is the future. This is what we built. This is what we wanted. It must have been, because we all had the fucking choice, didn't we?
In a world of risks and connections, it's not just possible for a single person to do really horrible things. It's almost inevitable.
The impetus for Dr. Sleepless was people like Hitler, but not in the usual way. I've known people who saw Hitler. And as he drove past in the car, giving his salute, people would literally shit themselves. You'd see people yanking their trousers down and shitting into hedges. There was a sense of just raw human awe, and people would lose control of themselves in their presence. How can that not help but be fascinating? Just one short house painter from Austria can make you shit yourself from awe. There is something in us that is wrong, that responds to these people no matter who they are and what they're going to do.
There's an element of Warren in Dr. Sleepless, and it's not the dominant element of Warren. But I think a lot of the doubts that Warren has about the future, a lot of doubts that he has about the present, have been articulated in the Dr. Sleepless character.
Have you ever been out in the world? It's full of fucking people. There's one thing I hate is people. I need this. Ignition City is dealing with the failed promise of spaceflight. The likes of Flash Gordon had been promising us rocket ships since 1930.
The future used to be deep and agreed on. You know, we were going to go into space and we were going to conquer the universe. That's not going to happen. It creates a sense of anxiety because we can't all agree on the future. Because the future is something that happens to us rather than something that we build together.
There is still a sense that we were somehow cheated out of our future in space. At this point, we have fewer rocket ships than we've had since I was born. Maybe it's just time to stop thinking of things we can never do and start thinking about the things we can do.
We live in a world where we can buy sex drugs in pharmacies. A world where we, in fact, had video phones and discarded them as boring. The future isn't dead, we simply overtook it and then shot off into new territory that we don't have the maps for yet.
The things that surround us that are of the future, we don't pay attention to as much as we should, possibly because they are not the things we were promised.
We're not getting some utopia here. Things are still kind of crummy. The economy's bad. People don't have jobs.
Everyone fell in love with the idea of cyberspace. But you'll notice in Bill Gibson's Neuromancer, no one has a mobile phone. And the things we can do with a mobile phone are in lots of ways above and beyond what we were promised in cyberspace, but we don't think of it as mundane. It's not been presented to us in fiction first.
Warren has that kind of frustration of the mad scientist.
The only way in which a mad scientist is reasonable is that they want the future to come faster, which I consider to be completely reasonable.
Look at the last 100 years. We had 3 world wars, 4 global pandemics, AIDS, and you look at it in perspective and you're like, oh yeah, and we also have fucking penicillin and the internet. Cavemen are always afraid of fire. That's our job as cavemen, you know? But after a while, you're like, oh, fuck, dude, we can cook now.
There has to be benefits towards making the future of medical science come faster, the future of energy production come faster. Yes, I mean, they will also breed mutants and bring mad people back from the dead and create giant ants, but I consider these to be entirely tenable side effects.
I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if there is some plan afoot for him to have his head preserved and brought back in the 30th or 40th century, just because he's curious and he wants to see what's coming next.
You people don't remember what life used to be like. Do you remember how people used to line up for bread? Remember when we couldn't get anything to grow across half this country? Winter by winter, that changed. The world got better. And when the world still wasn't good enough, when things were still fucked, there was always next winter to look forward to. The future is an inherently good thing, and we move into it one winter at a time. Things get better one winter at a time.
Warren's fascination with the future comes from his intense sense of hope. He wants the amazing, shiny, fantastical future we were promised. And if he's not going to get it, he's going to make it up.
People call me a cynic, but I think it might be truer to think of myself as just a constantly disappointed optimist, which isn't quite the same thing.
And what he's saying is, why don't we dare to hope that we might make it? Why don't we avoid succumbing to misery and pessimism? So I think that ultimately Warren's optimism is that we will keep going and there'll be more to see, and that it might be dark and it might be bloody, but it'll also be great.
I wouldn't have had a kid if I didn't think there was hope in the world.
When his daughter was born, he took her outside and raised her to the sky and introduced her to the world. Global and welcoming and warm and beautiful way that he has.
She's 14. Dresses in nothing but black, listens to nothing but metal. It's great. There are two things people never tell you about becoming a parent. One is it's actually fun, and you're really going to enjoy yourself in ways you never thought you would. The other thing is you're going to be scared for the rest of your life. There are things I could look at before Lily was born that I couldn't look at afterwards.
Scars is written by a guy who loves his daughter more than anything. In a way, it's the most truthful thing he's done. It's so emotionally honest and raw. But I don't think I could read it now that I have kids. I do not think I could put myself through that experience.
Having a daughter impacted the creative process only insofar as it slowed it down or had me just working with one hand for the first year.
He had cats and animals out in the back. He had ferrets and in cages and big, beautiful back lawn and a beautiful daughter.
She'll occasionally pick up one of my books and say, "Did you write this?" I say, "Yeah." She'll say, "Is there gross stuff in it?" And I usually have to say, "Well, yes." She'll throw it away in disgust and then go and watch, what is it, Law and Order comedy rape cavalcade or whatever that thing's called. Watch someone being sodomised with a violin bow. But no, I'm gross. I'm the gross one.
It's Warren Ellis. What are you going to do?
I have to learn these things from someone. It might as well be me. The world will lie to you and cheat you constantly. That's what I taught my daughter. Yeah. I should write a book.
He was a family man, and yet he completely had that edge.
Well, if you ask my daughter, I think she'd tell you that the Warren Ellis that's online is much the same as Warren Ellis, the parent. No, she's actually a good kid. She's got a lot of self-discipline. I don't have a lot of trouble with her. Occasionally, yeah, but you know, she's 14. It's going to happen, and frankly, that's what 14-year-olds are for. Often, I've got to admit, I will tell her not to do something, and then I have to laugh about it afterwards because it's exactly what I would have done at her age.
There's always this intermingling of technology and art with Warren.
And he likes the idea of the internet, he likes the idea of people being connected, Twitter and Facebook. He's into all that computer feeds and reads and watches the news incessantly.
I've gotten most of my news from him, from his retweets or from things that he's linking to.
You can almost tell what his next story is going to be by what he's talking about in current events on his blogs and what he's researching online.
He's giving us a kind of news which more literal journalism can't quite pull together yet.
When he writes his kind of futuristic stuff, it's always about people having enhancements and being able to go online by blinking their eyes.
And now it's become such a part of our being and of our culture and our civilization that it's become seamless.
Half my brain is inside the internet at any one time, and I kind of flounder when I haven't got a connection.
Freak Angels is a post-apocalyptic comic that Warren produces as a webcomic, 4 pages a week, every week.
Basically, it's EastEnders with superpowers.
It was time to do a big chunk of something dramatic on the web.
The thing that struck me initially was the fact that Warren was like, this is my work, I think it's good, I'm just gonna put it out there online and then trust that if they like the work, they'll pay for it, which is awesome, and it takes balls.
The idea of going web first and then producing paper collections was something quite new at the time. He wasn't the first to do it, but I think he's certainly been one of the most successful.
What Warren did with Freak Angels, I think, has fundamentally changed the way the comics business works. Because it's not anecdotal. You can look at sales numbers and you can look at the reach of that book and you can clearly say, this experiment works.
Our relationship with Warren is kind of like a conversation about technology and storytelling and how the world should be or will be.
Fiction is the impetus of architecture. We invent something before we build it.
He throws ideas out there so that maybe it will be invented in some way.
Sometimes you can't help but think, that was a stupid idea I made up while drunk. Why did someone build that?
A lot of the design work that we do, it's very inspired by some of Warren's work. Trying to find these genuine outbreaks of the future and turn them into products that everybody can have.
Treat an overload of intelligence and information and technology as wonderment and not fear.
To me, I think the unfinished business of the 20th century is in large part to remind people that we actually live in the science fiction condition. Our phones are less and less for actually talking to other people. Our phones are for talking to things that are not alive, but yet speak to us. It's a ghost box, it's an Ouija board, it's a device for seances. Much of where we are in the present day and many of the possible futures that face us are about talking to dead things, and about being haunted, and are about being surrounded by ghosts. Every time we're on a city street, we're in the presence of ghosts, we're in the presence of invisible fields that transfer communication that we cannot see, but also that we cannot do without. Just as we are nothing without the work and the memories of our own ancestors. It's a strange future we've ended up with. I'm looking for new challenges, because I've been working in comics now for 20 years. I've done a lot of what I set out to do. I'm just looking for things to keep me interested.
10 years from now, the sort of things that he did are going to seem a lot more sensible to people. Okay, why can't I be like a guy who does comics and also novels and also, I mean, transmedia style people?
In 2007, Warren wrote his first novel, Crooked Little Vein.
And I got a phone call saying, you've inherited a book agent. I want you to write a novel. And I said, go away. And she wouldn't. She kept coming back every few months. So in the end, I blocked out like 10 days. And I wrote 10,000 words of a novel that was designed specifically to make her go away. As with all my plans, it backfired horrendously, and within 2 weeks she'd sold it. So that is how I ended up writing a novel.
Crooked Little Vein is pure Warren Ellis.
Detective novel, but with, of course, the Warren Ellis twist on it.
A conversation with Warren where he tells me all of the weird, bizarre shit he's discovered in places man was not meant to go.
Some images that I'm still in therapy to try and forget.
The Godzilla Bukkake. It's really hard to imagine any artist, no matter how brilliant, really doing that scene justice.
But it's also really beautiful and heartfelt and romantic.
It's probably the closest you're going to get to like just sitting down and having a rather disturbing look inside his brain.
But I definitely keep at least one copy around. So when someone's like, oh, that sounds interesting, I've never read that, I can be like, you don't know about Warren Ellis? Now you have no excuse not to know about Warren Ellis. Take it, read it. There will be a quiz.
Warren Ellis's comic Red was adapted into a movie in 2010. It stars Bruce Willis, Helen Mirren,
John Malkovich, Morgan Freeman. It was huge.
Warren did a brilliant thing, which was he said, take it, go with God, do what you have to do to make it into a great movie.
People seem to enjoy the Red movie. I did. I got to go to the premiere with my daughter, which was nice.
I think he was absolutely thrilled. Well, you had to be, didn't you? But you don't get much reaction out of a Brit. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. You know, oh, yeah, I like that. You're not going to get a huge amount of enthusiasm.
Relief, mostly, that it was an entertaining film and that it didn't die on its arse.
When he was a broke kid living in a cold water flat, he had never imagined that he was going to be writing for Hollywood. And I think that's something that he's going to be doing more.
I don't know, like sometimes I wonder about people who write things or are performers, and it's like, do they have to force it? Do they have to like get in their little specific headspace and be like, okay, I'm gonna make this crazy thing? And no, he's just like that. Like, that's really just you, and that's awesome.
Some people are just wired for telling stories, and I'm one of them.
He's a frustrated inventor. But he's an inventor of worlds and characters that bring those worlds to life.
It's great. He's a guy that can still fall in love with comics, can still find comics that he loves.
Pioneers get a lot of arrows in their backs. I wouldn't be surprised if something went south for the guy, but that doesn't matter. He doesn't have to be a huge commercial success to be a significant cultural figure.
10 years from now, I imagine I will be mostly prose. I will still be doing comics, because comics are my first love. I can't imagine a time when I wouldn't be doing them. But comics are a monthly business, and it's hard to get away from that. And I don't think exceptions are going to be made for me.
I think his legacy will be, you know, a lot of goddamn good comics, you know, and I don't think you can ask for more than that.
Warren Ellis's legacy. Probably acres upon acres of empty Red Bull cans.
You know, if someone comes up to you and say, you know, here's this thing you wrote, it's actually a hideous piece of shit, but I love it, would you sign it? You can't say, it's a hideous piece of shit, what's wrong with you, man? Get away from me. You can't do that. So you just smile and say, thank you very much, you know, just don't make me look at it.
Even though he writes some of the most outrageous stuff and some of the grossest, it's always in the service of connecting and a real desire for a better world. And when you find that out, he just becomes impossibly endearing because he's still such a badass.
I've never reached a point where I think, well, I'm always going to be able to work in comics now, I'll always be able to get a gig. I've never reached that point.
It's a strange world, let's keep it that way. They'll probably be on his tombstone.
He's saying, no one will ever be nothing to me. And that's what Warren is, I feel like. I feel like that's who he is in essence.
It's not actually all the really nasty, gritty stuff. I think ultimately it's love in the face of all that shit.
A lot of us will be very grateful to him for many years to come for that.
I think the guy just likes watching life unfold. He just doesn't like people to know it.
You always try to be the best you can be. If you're giving it less than everything you've got every day, then, you know, get the fuck out of the room. This feels like a weird thing to say with a camera pointed at me and this being, you know, the second session, and you've talked to all these people, but I'm just not that good. And, you know, hopefully one day I will be, but I'm still getting there. She opens her perfect mouth and the sound of a modem pours out, and then another. She opens her mouth and the electric scream beats up into the night. Another 2, 3 signal songs harmonise. More. 5, 10 shrieky girls looking up and dialing in. Shrieky girls are never alone. They live in an invisible web of constant secret conversation, transmitting raw feelings like they were texting notes. And I love them. 20, 30,000 shrieky girls smile just a little bit and turn away to dance.